The fine taped to my front door flapped violently in the winter wind, and I could barely read it through the frozen condensation forming on the paper. But the number at the bottom was clear enough. $500 for unauthorized wood smoke emissions during a community emergency. I stood there on my porch in Lakewood, Colorado, shivering in my thermal jacket while snow continued to dump from the sky at a rate that had already buried my truck up to the wheel wells. The power had been out for 16 hours. My gas fireplace would not work without electricity to run the blower and safety systems. So, I had done what any reasonable person would do when the temperature inside started dropping below 40 degrees. I lit a fire in the old wood-burning fireplace that the previous owner had installed before the HOA banned them 3 years ago. My name is Vincent Paulson, and I had lived in the Ridgemont Estates community for 5 years. I worked as a land use attorney specializing in municipal permits and easements, which meant I spent most of my days buried in paperwork that would make normal people's eyes glaze over. But I loved it. There was something satisfying about understanding the complex web of regulations, permits, and legal frameworks that made modern communities function. The HOA president, Helen Donnelly, had apparently trudged through 2 feet of snow in the middle of a blizzard just to fine me for keeping my house warm enough that my pipes would not burst. That took a special kind of dedication to being petty. I pulled the notice off my door and went back inside, where the fire was crackling nicely in the hearth. My living room had finally reached a comfortable 62 degrees. I could see my breath when I moved away from the fireplace, but at least the core of the house was livable. My phone buzzed. The cell towers were still working, running on backup generators. It was my neighbor, Frank Martinez. "Did you get one too?" he asked. "A fine for wood smoke." "Yeah, just found it on my door." "Same here." I am looking at a $750 fine because apparently I was burning excessively. "Vincent, my daughter is here with her baby. The kid is 6 months old. What was I supposed to do, let them freeze?" I sat down in my armchair near the fire, feeling anger building in my chest. This is insane. We are in the middle of a declared state of emergency. The governor activated the National Guard to help with snow removal. Helen does not care. You know how she is. She has been on a power trip ever since she got elected president last year. I did know. Helen Donnelly was a 52-year-old former real estate agent who had somehow accumulated enough rental properties in the area that she did not need to work anymore. She had moved into Ridgemont Estates 3 years ago and immediately started running for the HOA board. Her platform had been maintaining property values through strict compliance and community standards. What that actually meant was she liked telling people what to do. "Listen, I need to go," Frank said. "The baby is crying, but we should fight this." "Agreed. I will look into our options." After hanging up, I pulled out my laptop. The battery was still at 60%, and I had a portable charger that could give me several more hours of use. I pulled up the HOA's governing documents, specifically the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, better known as CC and Articles. The wood-burning fireplace ban had been implemented in 2022, citing air quality concerns and modern heating alternatives. All homes were required to use natural gas or electric heating systems. The fine structure for violations was clearly laid out, and technically, yes, Helen had the authority to issue these fines. But there was something else nagging at me. Something I had seen months ago when I was reviewing some documents for a client whose property backed up to our development. I started digging through my work files, searching for a case I had handled the previous summer. A commercial developer had wanted to build a small shopping center adjacent to Ridgemont Estates and needed to understand the utility easements in the area. That was when I found it. The natural gas service for our entire community ran through a private easement, not a public utility corridor. This was not uncommon for newer developments, but what made it interesting was the easement holder. The original developer of Ridgemont Estates, Pinnacle Mountain Developers, had retained ownership of the easement even after selling off all the lots. Pinnacle Mountain had been owned by Vincent Paulson, my grandfather. He had died 4 years ago and left his entire business estate to me. At the time, I had gone through mountains of paperwork with the estate attorney, transferring properties, dissolving some business entities, and consolidating others. I remembered the Ridgemont easement vaguely, but it had not seemed important. It was just a strip of land that utilities ran through. But now, sitting in my cold house with an unjust fine in my hand, I started to wonder about the implications. I spent the next 3 hours reading through documents on my laptop, letting the fire burn down to coals before adding another log. The wind howled outside, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. According to the news, this was the worst winter storm to hit Colorado in 20 years. What I discovered was fascinating and potentially explosive. The natural gas easement was indeed privately held, and I was the holder. But more than that, the utility company, Rocky Mountain Gas, had a service agreement that required them to seek permission from the easement holder for any modifications or service interruptions. It was an old agreement, probably never updated because no one thought it mattered. But there was another document, one that I had completely forgotten about. When the HOA had been formed, the original developer had negotiated a special arrangement. The HOA had the right to request utility modifications, but any such requests had to be approved by the easement holder. This was meant to prevent the utility company from making changes that might negatively impact property values. In practice, this meant I had to sign off on any significant changes to natural gas service in Ridgemont Estates. My mind was racing now. I picked up my phone and called my friend Derek Chen, who worked as a facilities manager for a large property management company. Derek, weird question. If an HOA wanted to mandate that everyone use natural gas heating, would the utility company need any special permits or agreements? Hi to you too, Vincent. Yeah, typically they would need a service guarantee agreement, especially if it is being written into the HOA rules as a requirement. The utility would have to confirm they can provide reliable service to all units. Why? Just working through something. Thanks. Another piece clicked into place. I pulled up the HOA's recent rule changes, the ones that had banned wood-burning fireplaces. The language specifically stated that all homes must maintain natural gas or electric heating as primary systems. It mandated natural gas as the preferred and recommended heating method. I grabbed my phone again and called the non-emergency line for Rocky Mountain Gas. After navigating through several menus, I finally reached a customer service representative. Hi, my name is Vincent Paulson. I am the holder of a private utility easement in Lakewood, and I need to confirm whether any service guarantee agreements have been filed against that easement. The representative put me on hold for several minutes. I added another log to the fire and watched the snow continue to pile up outside. My truck was completely buried now, just a white mound in the driveway. Mr. Paulson. Yes, I am showing an easement agreement filed in 2021. There is a service guarantee agreement associated with that easement for the Ridgemont Estates development. It guarantees priority service restoration and capacity allocation. And who requested that agreement? Let me check. It was requested by the Ridgemont Estates Homeowners Association. The application was approved and the agreement was signed by Helen Donnelly. There it was. And as the easement holder, was I required to approve that agreement? A pause. Let me pull up the easement terms. Yes, according to the documentation, any service guarantee agreements require written approval from the easement holder. Do you want me to check if your approval is on file? Please. Another long hold. My heart was pounding now. I knew what she was going to say. Mr. Paulson, I am not seeing any approval documentation from you, but the agreement appears to have been active for over 3 years now. Thank you. That is very helpful. I hung up and sat back, staring at the fire. Helen had obtained a service guarantee agreement that gave the HOA special priority for natural gas service, then used that agreement to justify banning alternative heating methods. She had done this without getting my approval as the easement holder, which meant the agreement was potentially invalid. And if the agreement was invalid, then the rule requiring natural gas heating might be invalid too. But more than that, I controlled the easement, which meant I controlled access to the natural gas service for the entire community. The power came back on around midnight. The heaters kicked in with a collective hum throughout the house, and the lights blazed to life. I had fallen asleep in the armchair by the fire, and the sudden brightness woke me up. I stood and stretched, then banked the fire and headed to bed. The next morning, the snow had finally stopped. 3 feet had fallen in total, and the entire community looked like a winter wonderland. Plows were already working on the main roads, their yellow lights flashing through the white landscape. I made coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a notepad. It was time to plan my response carefully. Helen had overplayed her hand, but I needed to be strategic about how I pushed back. First, I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. In it, I contested the fine on the grounds that it was issued during a declared emergency when alternative heating was necessary for safety. I cited Colorado state law regarding emergency exceptions to HOA rules. I kept my tone professional and reasonable. Then I drafted a second letter, this one to Rocky Mountain Gas. I informed them that I was the easement holder for the natural gas service to Ridgemont Estates, and that I had not approved the service guarantee agreement currently on file. I requested a formal review of the agreement's validity, and stated that, until this review was complete, I was not authorizing any special priority service arrangements. I sent both letters via email and certified mail. Then I waited. It took 3 days for Helen to respond. She called me directly, which surprised me. Usually the HOA communicated only through official letters. Vincent, this is Helen Donnelly. I received your letter contesting the fine. Helen, thanks for calling. I want to be clear that the fine stands. You violated a clearly stated community rule. The fact that it was snowing does not change that. Actually, Helen, it does. Colorado state law provides for emergency exceptions to HOA rules when safety is at risk. A power outage during a blizzard with sub-zero temperatures qualifies. That is your interpretation. The board has reviewed your letter and voted to deny your appeal. I took a sip of coffee and looked out my window. The sun was shining brilliantly off the snow. That is unfortunate. I was hoping we could resolve this reasonably. The fine is due within 30 days, Vincent. If you do not pay, we will place a lien on your property. I see. Well, I will have to consider my legal options then. You do what you need to do. Her voice was cold and clipped. But the rules apply to everyone, and I will not make exceptions just because someone thinks they are special. She hung up before I could respond. 2 days later, I received a letter from Rocky Mountain Gas. They were opening an investigation into the easement agreement and had temporarily suspended the service guarantee arrangement until the matter was resolved. They wanted to schedule a meeting with me to review the easement terms and determine the proper authorization process. I called them back immediately and set up a meeting for the following week. That evening, Frank called me again. "Vincent, did you hear what happened?" "What happened?" "The gas company sent a letter to the HOA saying they are suspending some kind of service agreement. Helen is losing her mind. She sent out an email to the whole community blaming you. She blamed me by name." "Oh yeah. She said that you are sabotaging the community's utility services because you are angry about the fine. She is calling for an emergency board meeting to discuss taking legal action against you." I felt a surge of anger. She is unbelievable. "What is going on, Vincent? What service agreement?" I explained the situation to Frank, walking him through the easement, the unauthorized agreement, and the implications. As I talked, I could hear him starting to chuckle. "So you basically control the natural gas for the whole neighborhood?" "The easement. Yes. The utility company needs my permission for special arrangements. And Helen never asked for your permission, never even knew she needed to. I think she saw the old developer documents and assumed everything was just handled by the utility company." Frank laughed outright now. "This is perfect. She has been strutting around here like she owns the place, and the whole time you had this ace up your sleeve." "I was not planning to use it. I just wanted to fight the fine. But if she wants to escalate things, I am ready." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. It was held in the community clubhouse, a nice facility with a large meeting room that overlooked the snow-covered common areas. About 30 homeowners showed up, which was a high turnout. I arrived right on time and took a seat in the back row. Helen was at the front table with the other board members: Robert Thompson, the vice president, Susan Park, the treasurer, and Gary Wheeler, the secretary. Helen called the meeting to order and got straight to the point. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We are here to discuss a serious matter affecting our community. As many of you know, our natural gas service guarantee has been suspended due to interference from one of our residents." She looked directly at me as she said this. Several people turned to follow her gaze. "Vincent Paulson has contacted Rocky Mountain Gas and made false claims about our utility agreements. Because of his actions, our community has lost its priority service status. This means that if we have any gas outages or issues, we will be treated like any regular neighborhood instead of receiving the expedited service we have paid for." Robert Thompson spoke up. "This is particularly concerning given the recent winter storms. We need reliable heating service." I raised my hand. Helen frowned but nodded at me. "I would like to address these accusations," I said, standing up. "You will have a chance to speak in a moment," Helen said. "We are not done with our presentation." "Actually, Helen, if you are going to accuse me of making false claims, I think I have a right to respond immediately." There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Helen's jaw tightened, but she gestured for me to come forward. I walked to the front of the room and turned to face the audience. "Helen says I made false claims to the gas company. That is not true. I informed them of a factual situation that they were not aware of. I am the holder of the private easement that the natural gas lines run through for this community. That easement was part of my grandfather's estate, which I inherited." I pulled out copies of the easement documents and held them up. "According to the terms of this easement, any special service agreements require my written approval. 3 years ago, the HOA applied for a service guarantee agreement with Rocky Mountain Gas. I was never contacted about this. I never gave my approval. The gas company has now suspended that agreement pending a review because it was not properly authorized." Helen stood up quickly. "That easement is ancient history. The HOA has full authority to manage utility services for the community. Actually, you do not. I kept my voice calm and factual. The HOA has authority over common areas and architectural standards. Utility easements are a completely separate legal matter. If you had done proper due diligence before applying for the service agreement, you would have discovered that you needed the easement holder's permission. Susan Park, the treasurer, spoke up. Vincent, are you saying you will not approve the service agreement? I am saying that I was never asked. If the HOA had approached me respectfully and requested my approval, I probably would have given it without much thought. But instead, Helen has been on a campaign of harassment. She fined me $500 for heating my home during a blizzard. When I appealed that fine on legitimate legal grounds, she denied the appeal. Now she is calling me a saboteur in front of the community. Frank stood up from his seat. I got fined too, $750 for keeping my granddaughter warm. That baby is 6 months old. Helen expected me to let her freeze because of some rule about fireplace smoke. Another homeowner, Margaret Chen, raised her hand. I got a $500 fine as well. My husband is 73 years old and has respiratory problems. We needed heat. Suddenly, more hands were going up around the room. It turned out that Helen had issued fines to 11 different households for using their wood-burning fireplaces during the power outage. The mood in the room was shifting. People were angry now, but not at me. Robert Thompson looked uncomfortable. Helen, you did not tell us you were issuing this many fines. We never discussed that at a board meeting. I do not need board approval to enforce the rules, Helen snapped. That is part of my authority as president. Actually, Gary Wheeler said, consulting a binder in front of him, according to our bylaws, any fines over $250 require board approval, and mass enforcement actions should be discussed with the board first. Helen's face was turning red. This is ridiculous. We have rules for a reason. If people do not like the rules, they should not live here. I saw my opening. Speaking of rules, Helen, let me ask you something. When you pushed through the ban on wood-burning fireplaces 3 years ago, you justified it by saying everyone had natural gas heating as an alternative. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Everyone here has access to natural gas. And you obtained a service guarantee agreement to ensure that gas service would be reliable. Is that also correct? She hesitated, sensing a trap. The HOA obtained an agreement to protect homeowners, yes. An agreement that you obtained without proper authorization, and that is now suspended. So you banned our emergency backup, heating option based on the guarantee of an alternative that you did not have the legal authority to secure. The room erupted. People were shouting questions at Helen, demanding to know why she had banned fireplaces, why she was issuing fines during emergencies, and what would happen if the gas service was interrupted again. Helen tried to regain control, banging her gavel on the table. Everyone calmed down. This is getting out of hand. No, Helen, I think it is just getting started, Frank said. I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the board leadership. This was a nuclear option in HOA politics, but several people immediately voiced their support. The room descended into chaos. I quietly returned to my seat and watched the proceedings. Robert Thompson was trying to restore order, but it was not working. Susan Park looked stunned. Gary Wheeler was frantically taking notes. Finally, Helen stood up and grabbed her papers. Fine. If this community wants to destroy itself, go ahead. I am done. She stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving her fellow board members sitting at the table in shock. The meeting eventually calmed down enough for Robert to adjourn it properly. He announced that there would be a special election meeting in 2 weeks to address the board composition and the various issues that had been raised. As people filed out, Several homeowners came up to thank me. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. That was something else. Did you see her face when everyone started piling on? I actually feel a little bad, I admitted. I did not mean to cause that much chaos. Are you kidding? She had this coming. She has been a nightmare since she got elected. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Helen officially resigned from the board via email, along with a lengthy letter explaining that the community was ungrateful and did not appreciate her efforts to maintain property values. The letter was so self-pitying and bitter that it actually generated sympathy for the remaining board members who had to deal with her. I met with Rocky Mountain Gas and explained the situation with the easement. They were apologetic about the confusion and agreed to work with the HOA to establish a proper service agreement once the board was restabilized. In the meantime, they would provide normal service to the community without any special guarantees. I also formally granted permission for basic utility service to continue through the easement, which protected everyone from any potential service interruptions while the paperwork was sorted out. The special election meeting was packed. Nearly every homeowner in the community showed up. Robert Thompson ran for president and won easily. Susan Park remained as treasurer. 2 new board members were elected, including Frank Martinez. One of the first acts of the new board was to rescind all the fines that had been issued for fireplace use during the blizzard. They also amended the rules to allow for emergency exceptions when power outages or other circumstances made primary heating systems unavailable. Then, they voted to formally request my approval for a new service guarantee agreement with Rocky Mountain Gas. Robert called me the night before the vote to ask if I would be willing to grant it. Of course, I told him. That was never the issue, I just wanted to be asked. I understand, and Vincent, I want to apologize. I should have questioned Helen more when she was pushing through all those aggressive enforcement actions. I thought she was just being thorough, but she was really just on a power trip. You were in a tough position. HOA boards are volunteer work, and most people do not want conflict. Still, we should have done better. The new board is going to be different. We are going to focus on maintaining the community without harassing people. The service agreement was approved with my written consent, properly filed this time. Rocky Mountain Gas restored the priority service guarantee, and everything went back to normal. Well, almost normal. About a month after everything settled down, I was out checking my mail when I noticed a moving truck in front of Helen's house. I watched as movers carried out furniture in boxes. Helen stood on the driveway, supervising with her arms crossed. Frank walked over to join me. She is moving. I see that. Heard she bought a condo in Denver. High-rise with a strict HOA where she cannot be on the board because she does not meet the residency requirements. That is probably for the best. Helen looked over and saw us watching. For a moment, our eyes met across the snowy street. She looked angry and bitter, but also somehow diminished. All her power and authority had evaporated, and she was just another middle-aged woman moving to a new place. She turned away without acknowledging us and went back into her house. Think she learned anything? Frank asked. Probably not. People like that rarely do. The moving truck finished loading and drove away as the sun began to set. The snow on the ground was starting to melt now that spring was approaching. The whole nightmare of the blizzard and the fines felt like something from a long time ago. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the new HOA board. They were proposing a community barbecue in the spring to bring everyone together and start fresh. They wanted my input on the plans. I smiled and started typing a response. Sometimes the system worked the way it was supposed to. Sometimes people learned from their mistakes and made things better. And sometimes Knowing your rights and standing up for yourself actually made a difference. The easement documents that my grandfather had carefully maintained had seemed like just another piece of legal paperwork when I inherited them. But they had turned out to be the leverage I needed to fight back against petty tyranny and overreach. Not because I wanted power or control, but because I wanted fairness and common sense. As I walked back to my house, I thought about calling my mom to tell her the story. She had always loved hearing about how Grandpa Richard's meticulous business practices continued to have impacts years after his death. He had believed in doing things properly, in maintaining good records, and in understanding the long-term implications of legal agreements. Those values had served me well. Inside my house, I lit a fire in the fireplace, not because I needed the heat, but because I could. The wood crackled and popped, sending up a thin wisp of smoke that rose from my chimney into the clear evening sky. No one was going to find me for it. The following months were refreshingly quiet. The new HOA board operated with a much lighter touch, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement actions. They repaired the playground equipment, organized a neighborhood watch program, and even started a community garden on one of the common areas. Robert Thompson turned out to be an excellent president. He was diplomatic and fair-minded, always seeking input from homeowners before making decisions. Frank brought a practical, no-nonsense approach to his board position, often asking, "Does this really matter?" when discussions got too nitpicky. I attended a few board meetings just to stay informed, but mostly I appreciated being able to just live my life without HOA drama. My work kept me busy, and I took on a few interesting cases involving utility easements and land use permits. The Ridgemont situation had reminded me why I loved this area of law. The details mattered, and understanding those details could make a real difference. In May, the community barbecue happened. It was a beautiful spring day, and nearly everyone came out. Kids ran around the common areas while adults grilled burgers and hot dogs. Someone set up a volleyball net, and an impromptu tournament broke out. I was manning the grill when Susan Park came over with a plate of potato salad. "This is nice," she said. "I cannot remember the last time we did something like this." "It has been a while," I agreed, flipping burgers. "Everyone seems to be having a good time." "You know, Vincent, I wanted to thank you again for how you handled everything. You could have really made things difficult for the community, but you took the high road." I just wanted the fine rescinded. The rest kind of spiraled on its own. Still, a lesser person would have used that easement as a weapon. You used it as a shield instead. I had never thought about it that way, but she was right. I could have threatened to revoke gas access or demanded money or any number of petty revenge schemes. Instead, I had simply insisted on proper procedures and reasonable treatment. "Helen made her own problems," I said. "I just refused to be a victim of her power trip." "Well, the community is better for it. Oh, and I have some news you might find interesting. Remember how Helen said she was fighting to maintain property values?" "Yeah." I ran a comparison of our home values against similar communities in the area. During her tenure as president, our property values actually declined slightly relative to the market. All her aggressive enforcement was not helping at all. That does not surprise me. People do not want to buy into a community with a reputation for being difficult. Exactly. Since the board changes, we have already seen increased interest from buyers. 3 houses have sold in the past month, all over asking price. Frank joined us carrying a beer. "Are you talking business at a barbecue? Come on, Susan, live a little," she laughed. "Fine, fine, I will save it for the next meeting." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself talking to neighbors I had barely known before. The crisis had brought the community together in an unexpected way. People who had just waved in passing were now chatting about their lives, their kids, their jobs. Old Mr. Harrison, who lived 3 houses down, pulled me aside at one point. "Vincent, I wanted to tell you something. My son is a lawyer in Denver, and I told him about what happened here. He was impressed with how you handled it. He said most people would have either rolled over and paid the fine or gone nuclear with lawsuits. I appreciate that. I just tried to find a reasonable middle ground. Well, it worked. My son wanted me to tell you that if you ever want to talk about joining a larger firm, he would be happy to introduce you to some people. No pressure, just keeping doors open." I thanked him and said I would think about it. I was happy with my solo practice for now, but it never hurt to have connections. As the sun began to set, people started packing up. Kids were tired and parents were ready to get home. I helped clean up the grilling area and fold up tables. Frank came over as I was loading my folding chair into my truck. Hell of a day. It really was. You know what the best part is? We are just a normal neighborhood again. No drama, no power-hungry board presidents, just people living their lives. That is all I ever wanted. We stood there for a moment, watching the last few families head home. The community looked peaceful in the fading light, with well-maintained houses and green lawns recovering from the winter snow. "Hey, Vincent," Frank said. "When you inherited that easement from your grandfather, did you have any idea it would matter? Not even a little. It was just another document in a huge pile of estate paperwork. I almost had my attorney dissolve it just to simplify things. Good thing you did not." "Yeah, good thing." 1 week later, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing Helen Donnelly. My stomach sank as I opened it, expecting some kind of lawsuit or accusation. Instead, it was a settlement offer. Helen was proposing to pay me $5,000 in exchange for me signing a non-disclosure agreement about certain events related to the HOA. The letter was carefully worded to avoid admitting any wrongdoing, but made it clear that Helen wanted to prevent me from talking about what had happened. I called Robert Thompson immediately. "Did Helen's attorney contact the HOA?" "Yes, we got a similar letter. She is offering to pay back all the fines she issued, plus a contribution to the community fund, in exchange for everyone signing NDAs and agreeing not to pursue any legal action against her personally. What is the board thinking? We are meeting tomorrow night to discuss it. What are your thoughts?" I sat down at my kitchen table and read through the letter again. I think Helen is worried about something. Maybe her new condo board found out about what happened here, or maybe she is trying to protect her reputation for some other reason. The thing is, none of us were planning to sue her anyway. We just wanted her gone, and she is gone. Right, but she does not know that. She is probably terrified that we are all plotting revenge. Robert laughed. That is kind of funny. After everything she put us through, she is the one who is scared now. So what are you going to tell her attorney? I think we will take the money for the community fund, but refuse the NDA. We are not going to go around bad-mouthing her, but we are also not going to sign away our right to talk about our own experiences. I am going to do the same thing. I will let her keep her $5,000. The board meeting the next night resulted in a unanimous decision to reject the NDA requirement. The attorney sent back a counteroffer without the NDA, just asking for a general agreement not to pursue legal action. That was something everyone could live with. Helen paid back all the fines plus a $10,000 contribution to the community fund. The money went toward renovating the clubhouse and adding new playground equipment. I never heard from Helen again after that. According to Frank, who seemed to have an intelligence network that rivaled the CIA, She had indeed gotten into trouble with her new condo association. Apparently, she had tried to file complaints about her neighbors and was told that her concerns were not violations of any rules. When she persisted, the condo board had done a background check and discovered the situation at Ridgemont Estates. They had then informed her that if she continued to file frivolous complaints, she would be fined for harassment under their governing documents. Helen had apparently learned to keep her head down after that. Summer arrived, and life in Ridgemont Estates settled into a comfortable routine. I worked on my cases, enjoyed my fireplace-equipped home, and appreciated living in a community that was not constantly at war with itself. One afternoon in July, I was reviewing documents for a client when I got a call from Gary Wheeler, the HOA secretary. "Vincent, we have a situation I wanted to run by you. Nothing bad, just something that relates to your expertise." "Sure, what is going on?" "The community is looking at installing electric vehicle charging stations in the common parking area. We would need to run new electrical lines, and they would cross through your utility easement. I wanted to check with you before we got too far into the planning." I smiled. This was exactly how it was supposed to work. "I appreciate you asking, Gary. Send me the details and I will take a look. I do not anticipate any problems, but I want to make sure everything is done properly." "Will do." "And Vincent, we are happy to compensate you for the easement use if that is appropriate. Let me review the documents first. We can figure out fair terms once I understand what is involved." A week later, I met with the board and reviewed the charging station plans. The electrical work would require a small permanent easement through my property. So we worked out an agreement where the HOA would pay me a nominal fee and maintain insurance covering any issues related to the installation. It was all very professional and cordial. Everyone understood their rights and responsibilities, and we worked together to find a solution that benefited the community. Frank joked that I was becoming the community's favorite lawyer, even though I kept insisting I was not representing the HOA in any official capacity. But the truth was, people knew they could trust me to be fair and knowledgeable, and that reputation was valuable. The charging stations were installed in September, and they were immediately popular. Several residents had electric vehicles, and having convenient charging access increased the appeal of the community. Property values continued to rise. The community newsletter, which had been a dry list of rules and violations under Helen's presidency, became an actual newsletter with resident profiles, upcoming events, and useful information. People started referring to Ridgemont Estates as a friendly, well-managed community instead of the uptight, rule-obsessed place it had been developing a reputation as. In October, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out and approached me. "Excuse me, are you Vincent Paulson?" "I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Jennifer Torres. I am a reporter with the Denver Post, and I am working on a story about HOA governance issues in Colorado. Your name came up in my research, and I was hoping I could ask you some questions." My guard went up immediately. "What kind of story?" "It is actually a positive piece. I am looking at communities that have successfully resolved HOA conflicts and reformed their governance. Ridgemont Estates came up as an example of a community that turned things around." I leaned on my rake and considered this. "Who told you about Ridgemont?" "I interviewed someone from the Community Associations Institute, and they mentioned your situation as an interesting case study. They said you used property rights and legal knowledge to push back against overreach, but did it in a way that improved the community rather than destroying it." "Huh, I never thought of it that way. Would you be willing to talk about what happened?" I have already spoken to your HOA president and several other residents. Everyone spoke highly of how you handled things. I agreed to an interview, and we sat down at my kitchen table. Jennifer was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about the easement, the fine, the discovery process, and the resolution. She seemed particularly interested in the legal framework and how private property rights interacted with HOA authority. "What I find fascinating," she said, "is that you had significant leverage but chose not to weaponize it. You could have shut off gas access or demanded huge payments, but you just wanted fairness." "I live here too," I said. "Destroying the community would have hurt me as much as anyone else. I just wanted Helen to back off and treat people reasonably." "You think HOAs are fundamentally flawed?" "No, I think they are necessary in planned communities. Someone needs to maintain common areas and enforce basic standards. The problem is when board members lose sight of the fact that they are serving the community, not ruling it." Helen thought being HOA president made her a queen. "It does not. It makes you a volunteer administrator." Jennifer nodded, taking notes. "That is a great quote. One more question. What advice would you give to homeowners dealing with difficult HOA situations?" I thought about this carefully. "First, know your rights. Read your CC and Articles, understand your governing documents, and know what your HOA can and cannot do. Second, document everything. Keep records of all communications and violations. Third, look for leverage points but use them responsibly. And fourth, try to work with reasonable board members when possible. Most HOA conflicts can be resolved through communication and compromise." The article came out 3 weeks later. It was a full-page feature in the Sunday edition, with the headline "How One Attorney Used Property Rights to Reform His HOA." The piece was balanced and well-written, explaining the situation clearly without demonizing anyone. Jennifer had even interviewed Helen, though her quotes were brief and defensive. She maintained that she had been trying to protect property values and that she had been forced out by residents who did not appreciate her efforts. The article generated significant attention. I got calls from several homeowners in other communities asking for advice on their own HOA disputes. A few attorneys contacted me about collaborating on HOA-related cases. And the Community Associations Institute asked if I would be willing to speak at a conference about property rights and HOA governance. Frank found the whole thing hilarious. "You are famous now. Vincent Paulson, HOA warrior. I am not a warrior. I just knew my rights." Same thing, man. Same thing. The conference was scheduled for January, and I agreed to participate on a panel discussion. It would be in Colorado Springs, just a 90-minute drive from Lakewood. The topic was balancing community standards with individual rights, and I would be speaking alongside HOA attorneys, board members, and property rights advocates. As winter approached again, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in 1 year. Last winter, I had been fighting for the basic right to heat my home during a blizzard. This winter, I was preparing to speak at a conference about HOA reform. The first snow of the season fell in November, a light dusting that reminded everyone what was coming. I made sure my wood supply was stocked, my fireplace was cleaned and inspected, and my backup heating options were ready. I also checked on my elderly neighbors to make sure they were prepared. The new HOA board had implemented an emergency preparedness plan, including a phone tree to check on vulnerable residents during power outages. It was exactly the kind of practical, community-focused initiative that made sense. December brought heavier snows, but nothing like the monster storm from the previous year. The power stayed on, and life continued normally. I spent Christmas with my family in Boulder, telling them the whole saga of Helen and the easement and the HOA reform. My mom laughed until she cried. Your grandfather would have loved this. He always said that knowing the details was the difference between having power and being powerless. He was right. If I had not kept those easement documents, or if I had not known how to research the situation, I would have just paid the fine and moved on. But you did not. You stood up for yourself and ended up helping everyone. The conference in January was eye-opening. I met HOA board members from across Colorado, and I heard horror stories that made Helen look tame by comparison. There were boards that foreclosed on homes over minor violations, boards that embezzled community funds, and boards that engaged in outright discrimination. But I also heard success stories. Communities that had implemented fair enforcement policies, boards that worked collaboratively with residents, and HOAs that actually added value to their neighborhoods. During my panel discussion, I explained the Ridgemont situation and emphasized the importance of understanding the legal framework. HOAs operate within a complex web of state law, governing documents and property rights, I said. Board members need to understand these limitations. And homeowners need to know their rights so they can push back against overreach. An attorney in the audience asked, but doesn't pushing back create conflict and division? Sometimes, I admitted, but conflict is not always bad. The conflict in my community exposed problems that needed to be addressed. Helen's authoritarian approach was making everyone miserable. The confrontation led to reform, and now we have a healthier community. After the panel, several people approached me with questions and stories. A few asked if I would be willing to consult on their cases. I handed out business cards and said I would consider it. On the drive home, I thought about how much I had learned through this experience. I had always been comfortable with property law and legal research, but I had gained a new appreciation for HOA governance and community dynamics. There was a real need for attorneys who understood both the law and the human element of these disputes. Back in Ridgemont Estates, life continued peacefully. Spring brought the annual meeting, where Robert Thompson was re-elected as president by acclamation. The board presented a financial report showing the community in excellent shape, with reserves fully funded and maintenance up to date. During the open forum portion of the meeting, Susan Park stood up and made a motion. I would like to propose that we officially thank Vincent Paulson for his service to the community. His knowledge and professionalism during last year's difficulties helped us achieve positive reform. The motion passed unanimously, and I received a plaque that read, "In appreciation for dedication to community welfare and fair governance." It was a nice gesture, though I felt a bit embarrassed by the attention. After the meeting, I walked home under a clear spring sky, carrying my plaque and thinking about the strange journey I had been on. A simple fine for heating my home during a blizzard had led to HOA reform, a newspaper article, speaking engagements, and a new direction for my legal practice. All because my grandfather had carefully maintained property records, and I had inherited a utility easement I barely knew existed. The next morning, I received an email from Rocky Mountain Gas. They were updating their records and wanted to confirm the current status of the easement agreement. I responded with the relevant documentation and thanked them for their continued service to the community. It was such a mundane, bureaucratic exchange. But it represented something important, a properly functioning system where everyone understood their roles and responsibilities. No drama. No conflict. Just people doing their jobs and working together. That was all I had ever wanted. As I sat on my porch that evening watching the sun set over the mountains, I thought about Helen Donnelly. I wondered if she had learned anything from what happened. Probably not. People who crave power and control rarely change, but the community had learned. The residents had learned that they could stand up to unreasonable authority. The board had learned that governance should be about service, not power. And I had learned that sometimes your most valuable assets are the ones you did not even know you had. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. "Barbecue at my place Saturday. Bring beer." I smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." This was what community was supposed to be. Neighbors gathering together, supporting each other, and enjoying life without unnecessary conflict or drama. The easement documents sat in my file cabinet, properly organized and maintained, just as my grandfather had taught me. They represented both a legal right and a responsibility. The power to control utility access, yes, but also the obligation to use that power wisely and fairly. I had no plans to ever use them as a weapon again, but I would keep them safe and current, just in case anyone else ever decided that their authority put them above fairness and common sense. Because knowledge is power, but wisdom is knowing how to use that power. And sometimes, the best use of power is restraint. The stars came out, bright and clear in the Colorado sky. Inside my house, the fireplace sat ready for the next cold night, legal and permitted and available whenever I needed it. No one was going to find me for using it. Not anymore. Not ever again. The story of Ridgemont Estates became something of a legend in Colorado HOA circles. Not because of dramatic confrontations or legal battles, but because it showed that reform was possible. Communities dealing with difficult boards reached out to me for advice, and I found myself becoming an informal consultant on HOA disputes. I never took on work that involved actual litigation against HOAs. That felt too much like declaring war on the entire concept of community governance. Instead, I helped homeowners understand their rights, review governing documents, and identify leverage points for negotiation. Most disputes could be resolved through education and communication. When board members understood the legal limits of their authority, and when homeowners understood how to assert their rights respectfully, compromise became possible. The work was satisfying in a way my regular practice sometimes was not. I was helping people who felt powerless against systems that seemed designed to oppress them. And I was doing it without destroying communities or creating unnecessary conflict. Frank joked that I had found my calling as the HOA whisperer, but there was some truth to it. I understood both sides of these disputes because I had lived through one. I knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of unreasonable enforcement, but I also understood the challenges of volunteer governance. By summer, I had helped resolve disputes in 6 different communities. None of them were as dramatic as my own situation, but all of them resulted in positive changes. Boards became more responsive. Homeowners felt heard. Communities improved. Robert Thompson called me one evening in August. "Vincent, the CAI Colorado chapter wants to know if you would join their legislative committee. They are working on HOA reform legislation, and they think your perspective would be valuable." "What kind of reform?" "Mostly transparency and due process stuff. Requirements for board training, clearer appeals processes for fines, limits on enforcement during emergencies. The kind of things that would have prevented your situation with Helen." I agreed to join the committee. Over the following months, we drafted proposed legislation that would strengthen homeowner rights while preserving HOA's ability to maintain communities. It was delicate work, balancing competing interests and navigating political realities. The legislation was introduced in the state legislature in February, and began working its way through committees. I testified twice, explaining how the proposed reforms would prevent abuses while supporting effective governance. The HOA industry lobby opposed some provisions, arguing they would make enforcement too difficult. But homeowner advocacy groups supported the bill, and several news outlets covered the debate. In May, a modified version of the legislation passed both houses and was signed by the governor. It was not everything we had hoped for, but it included emergency exception requirements, mandatory board training, and clearer appeals processes. I received a copy of the signed bill in the mail, along with a note from the CAI president thanking me for my work. It was one of the proudest moments of my legal career. That weekend, Frank hosted another barbecue at his place. As we stood around the grill, he raised his beer in a toast to Vincent, who turned getting fined for heating his house into actual legislative reform. "You are either brilliant or insane, and I have not figured out which." Everyone laughed and raised their drinks. I felt my face getting red, but I was smiling. "I just wanted the fine rescinded," I said, repeating my constant refrain. "Yeah, but you ended up changing state law." "That is pretty good for a guy who just wanted to stay warm." As the evening wore on and people drifted into smaller conversations, I found myself standing alone for a moment, looking at the community around me. Kids playing, adults laughing, neighbors enjoying each other's company. This was what it was all about. Not power or control or winning arguments, just people living together in a community that worked. My phone buzzed. It was an email from a homeowner in Grand Junction asking for advice on a dispute with her HOA. I made a note to respond in the morning and put my phone away. Tomorrow I would get back to work, helping people navigate the complex world of HOA governance. But tonight, I was just a neighbor at a barbecue, enjoying the company of people who had become genuine friends through shared adversity. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm and filled with the smell of grilling meat and fresh cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and children laughed. This was home. Not just a house or a property, but a real community of people who looked out for each other. And I had played a small part in making it that way. The easement documents remained in my file cabinet, properly maintained and updated. I checked them periodically, making sure everything was current and correct. Not because I expected to need them again, but because I understood their value. Knowledge is power. But the real power lies in knowing when to use what you know and when to simply let things be. Helen Donnelly had taught me that lesson, though not in the way she intended. Her aggressive use of authority had sparked resistance. My measured response had created reform. As I drove home that night, I passed Helen's old house. A young family had moved in, and I could see through the windows that they were renovating the kitchen. The new owners had introduced themselves when they moved in, friendly and excited to be part of the community. They had no idea about the drama that had unfolded in their new home. No idea that their HOA had once been run by someone who saw residents as subjects rather than neighbors, and that was fine. The past was past. The community had moved forward, stronger and healthier than before. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house. The house where I had been fined for staying warm. The house that had sparked a chain of events leading to genuine reform. Inside, the fireplace waited, ready for the next cold night. Legal, permitted, and mine to use whenever I chose. I smiled and went inside, grateful for grandfathers who kept good records, for neighbors who stood together, and for the simple right to heat your home during a blizzard without being punished for it. Some battles are worth fighting. Not for victory or revenge, but for fairness and common sense. This had been one of those battles, and I had won by refusing to become the tyrant I was fighting against. That was enough. That was everything.